the reduction is gain of electron. And so what you're seeing transfer is the hydrogen, because that's where the electron is going to transfer over with. All right, so the oxidation is where you are losing the hydrogen, the reduction is where you gain it. Okay, so just kind of recapping the three pathways, so glycolysis, Krebs, and electron transport chain. Oxidation of glucose, glucose has a 1 to 2 to 1 ratio of C to H to O, and so as you see that oxidation, I'm not going to go through the chemical reaction of all of that, but basically you have an oxidation. Oxidation is loss of what? Electron. Where's the electron travel? On the hydrogen. So you've lost the hydrogen here, you put it somewhere else. So instead that hydrogen came over here, so this is reduced, this is oxidized. That's all the changes there. And then I'm sure you guys went all through this in lecture and just moving at examples of it. What I want to point out though is that the NADH and the FADH are what are going to be important in that electron transport chain, because you're moving that final electron, and that's what's going to create that additional ATP. Okay, so for glycolysis and Krebs cycle, you're using the substrate situation here. So ADP, which is adenosine di, like two phosphates hanging together, and then to phosphorylate them, we get that adenosine tri, 3 phosphates, or 3 of them together, and then that's what is our energy, so producing energy there. That's at the substrate level, so that's for glycolysis and Krebs. Where we really get a lot more bang for our buck is at the electron transport chain. So here we're going to essentially create a concentration gradient where you're going to have more hydrogen on this side of that crista, that inner mitochondrial membrane. And then, as is simple diffusion, you go from a high concentration down to low. And so as those hydrogens come across this ATP synthase, ACE enzyme is catalyzing a reaction. You're going to phosphorylate this ADP to ATP, and then that's where you're going to get your energy. And you're going to keep doing this depending on how many FAD versus NADH that you have. And so we'll take a look at that a little more specifically over here. So glycolysis, that beginning part of this whole process, is where we're breaking down glucose into pyruvic acid. We need the pyruvic acid in order to fuel the next stage, which is going to be Krebs cycle. The Krebs cycle is going to allow us to then fuel the electron transport chain. So we get a little bit of ATP from glycolysis, a little bit from Krebs, and then a whole lot from the electron transport chain. So this is where I had a spare board in the room, and I wrote everything out. And so I don't know if I can get as much on this board. I'll try. So glycolysis. Okay, so in the cytoplasm, and we're converting that glucose, like we said, into pyruvic acid, and we get 2 pyruvic acid. And so we're going to reduce, which means we are gaining that electron, we're gaining the H's. So 2 NAD to NADH plus an additional H. So the net is going to be we gain 2 ATP. Let's see, and then 2 NADH. Okay. All right, so the net gain is 2 ATP, and that's because it actually costs us 2. We gain 4, but the net is 2 because it's going to cost us 2 in order to get the party started. So that glucose, we said, is a 6-carbon molecule. That's what you see the 6 little gray spheres for here. So we have to utilize a little energy first in order to phosphorylate those 2 N carbons. And then as we split that in half, you see the 3 carbon with a phosphate, 2 of those, right? And so eventually when we finish this reaction, we're going to end up with 4 ATP, but again, it cost us 2, so 4 minus 2, we're left with 2. So that's our 2 net gain of ATP. And then here are our 2 reductions of NAD to NADH plus H. So in the end, we end up with pyruvic acid also, which is the carbon left over, and then that is going to fuel our Krebs cycle if we have oxygen present. If there's no oxygen present, this is just going to get us nasty old lactic acid, which is not going to buy us any ATP. So from that pyruvic acid, we can then fuel that Krebs cycle. So far, what we've gained from glycolysis is going to be 2 net ATP and then 2 NADH plus H. There's a transitional phase, which is going to occur kind of after glycolysis, before the Krebs cycle begins, where we're going to mess with that pyruvic acid, that 3-carbon substrate that we talked about, and we're going to convert that so that we can use that in the Krebs cycle. So basically it's converting to acetyl-CoA, coenzyme A. During this transitional phase, I get 2 more NADH plus H plus. Okay, and that's going to be important when I finally get to that electron transport chain. Okay, so now I get to Krebs cycle. So I change that pyruvic acid into acetyl-CoA. Now I'm going to use that acetyl-CoA to start that Krebs cycle. So remember that I have 2, so I'm going to spin this whole Krebs cycle twice. So all of the gains that you see here, you're multiplying by 2. All right, so I begin with that first pyruvic acid. We said in that transition phase, I converted that to acetyl-CoA. That acetyl-CoA, again, I'm going to have 2 of them total, so each one gets a full spin. Each spin is going to give me 1, 2, 3 NADH plus H and 1 FADH, 1 ATP. So I multiply all that by 2, and then here's what I get.
That confused me. I didn't know it did it twice.
It's confusing?
No, that explains it. I didn't know it did it twice because I would see the
yeah, because your pyruvic acid is a 3-carbon, and so each of those 3 carbons gets its own spin. So that's how your numbers double here.
Yeah, because I would see that and I'd be like, how did you get to those?
Okay. 2 FADH, 2 ATP. Okay. Okay, so we're spinning that whole thing twice. That's Krebs. Okay, so by the end of Krebs, what have we done so far? I have 2, 4, plus 6, I have 10 NADH plus H, and I have 1, 2, 3, 4 ATPs, 2 FADH. So a little bit of energy, not a whole lot so far. Okay, so let's get to the electron transport chain. All right, so where we are, we're in the mitochondria, and we're looking at the inner membrane. So if you look at this membrane, this plasma membrane here, this is the outer, so all of this area is the inside of the mitochondria. Within the inside of the mitochondria are those cristae, those inner membranes. And so this is just one of those little folded membranes, this cristae, which is also a plasma membrane here. And then embedded in that cristae, you're gonna have some of these channels, these proteins. And they're gonna have Roman numerals on them, so you can kind of see they just go in order here. So at the first one, what we see is that we are going to oxidize. We lose that electron, where does it go? So we're starting with an NADH. We lose that electron, it moves out into that intermembrane space. Inter meaning between, so we're kind of between those cristae. So I'm adding a hydrogen, which is what my electron is traveling on. I have an FADH. That is also going to be oxidized, okay? And so those electrons are actually going to move from complex 2 to this Q, and then over to 3. So because we skip 1, that is the reason why FADH does not give us as much ATP produced versus NADH. So we're going to end up having more ATP produced for each molecule of NADH that we have versus each molecule of FADH. So that's why, because we're skipping that first electron being put into that intermembrane space. And then we just keep going, we just keep moving that electron on down the road, and as we do that, we're pulling those hydrogens off. The electron gradient is going to be very high in this intermembrane space. So as you have this high concentration of your H's, as is simple diffusion, we go from high concentration down to low. Those hydrogens are going to come through this very special complex, ATP synthase. It spins it around, so we phosphorylate a DP into a TP. Okay, so let's take a look here. What is our bang for our buck? So, we have 10, we said NADH plus H, we had 2 FADH. So for each NADH, I multiply by 2.5. For each FADH, I'm gonna multiply by 1.5. And that's how much ATP. Now, like we said, you get more ATP for each NADH because you also are moving electrons across that first complex. With FADH, you start at complex 2, so you're not moving as many electrons across that inner membrane. So that's why the difference there. But when we add it up, so I have 10 NADH, I have 2 of these, and then we said how much for each NADH? 2.5 ATP, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so that gives me 25. For FADH, I'm gonna multiply by
1.5.
all right, good, so that gives me, so what's my net gain? That's where you come up with that. Okay, better? Different?
Way better.
Okay. Oh, and then where did that other plus 2 gives me 32 total. Sorry about that. So we want to add up what we originally did with glycolysis and Krebs.
Right, okay. Yes. Thank you.